Welcome to this build video on Power Necro. In this video I'll show you how I like to set up Power Necro for Arena in the current version of the game, which was changed on June 23rd with the new Heart of Thorns traits. A Power Necro is really a hard hitter that has huge burst potential. Life Blast is your primary direct damage dealer, and in this build each time it connects it will cause vulnerability and also grant might. You will also be using well-timed wells and skills like Dark Pact, Chill Blains, and Locust Swarm to immobilize, chill, and cripple enemies to trap them inside of those wells. You will also be using fears like Doom and Reaper's Mark to counter stomps and interrupt enemies. This build can be played with either Plague or Lich for your elite. Plague will offer more team support and survivability, and Lich, when used correctly, can destroy 2 or even 3 enemies with its burst and flip any fight in favor of your team. Power Necro requires good positioning and awareness to make it work. It is not as mobile as a Terramancer and is not as tanky as a Minion Master. It is also easily shut down by blind and heavy crowd control. So let's start by taking a look at traits. There are 2 ways you can build this. One is for more survivability, the other is for more damage. I personally go with the survivability build. In Spite, Reaper's Might grants 1 stack of might every time you land a Life Blast. For Adept training, take Spiteful Renewal. When you strike an enemy when they are below 25% health, you will lose 1 condition and gain a small amount of health. This is on a 5-second cooldown. Death's Embrace inflicts vulnerability when you strike a foe below 33% health. It also gives you a damage bonus while in a downed state. For Master Training, take Chill of Death. When an enemy is struck below 50% health, they are chilled and they have 3 boons removed. This is automatic, it's on a 20-second cooldown, at staff range, and it is unblockable. Siphon Power grants 2 stacks of might when you strike your foe below 50% health. For Grandmaster Training, take Close to Death. This gives you a 20% increase to your damage versus targets below 50% health. Okay, moving on to Death Magic. Armored Shroud grants toughness while in Death Shroud. For Adept Training, take Shrouded Removal. This removes 1 condition when you enter Death Shroud and continues to remove conditions every few seconds while you maintain the Shroud. Soul Comprehension increases life force gained from nearby deaths. For Master Training, I take Reaper's Protection, as it gives a nice anti-CC ability. However, Deadly Strength when used with Corruptor's Fervor can boost your damage even higher. Beyond the Veil gives us protection when we leave Death Shroud. For Grandmaster Training, I take Unholy Sanctuary, but as I mentioned, Corruptor's Fervor has a very nice synergy with Deadly Strength. In Soul Reaping, Gluttony increases life force gained by skills that generate life force by 10%. For Adept Training, take Unyielding Blast, as this is your main damage dealing ability, and each time you land one, you add 2 stacks of vulnerability to your target. Last Gasp activates Spectral Armor automatically when your health drops below 50%. For Master Training, take Vital Persistence. This makes your life force drain 50% slower, and Death Shroud skills recharge 15% faster. Strength of Undead grants you a 5% damage bonus above 50% and also increases life force. For Grandmaster Training, Foot in the Grave is a good option, as it is the shortest cooldown stunbreaker that exists in the game. However, my first choice is still going to be Death Perception, which increases our critical hit chance in Death Shroud by 50%. For gear, go with Berserker Amulet and Rune of the Pack. Sigils, I really like to stress to people that I think it is all about personal preference. Good ones I like to use are Energy. I put Energy on almost everything because Energy essentially gives you a free dodge roll when you switch weapons, and in a build like this, which doesn't have much mobility, that can be key. I also like Sigil of Ice on my staff. Sigil of Air is good for more damage. Sigil of Leeching is also good for a minor heal. For Dagger Warhorn, Rage is a popular choice because this is a high crit build and you're pretty much assured to get that quickness pretty quickly. I personally like Intelligence on my Dagger to make my Necrotic Bite guarantee crit. Sigil of Fire is also good for more damage here, and Energy on the Warhorn. Most of the time I run Well of Suffering, Well of Corruption, and Spectral Armor in my utility spots. Well of Suffering is one of my favorites. Well of Corruption is also equally awesome. But Well of Power and Well of Darkness are all good options that you should be familiar with so that you can make a decision based on what your team is made up of and what the enemy team has. You can also ditch one or both of the wells for something like Signet of Spite, or Blood is Power, or both if you just really want to push the limits of how much damage you can pump out. Spectral Walk over Spectral Armor is also an option. They are both stun breakers. One grants protection, the other gives mobility. In Death Shroud, Life Blast is your main damage dealer. Each time it lands, it will grant you might and cause vulnerability on your enemy. It also has a piercing ability on up to 5 targets, and it does hit harder the closer you are to your enemy. Dark Path is a good way to get to your enemy and apply Chill and Bleed. It is also a good way to bounce to another enemy to flee someone that is training you. In this build, Doom is used to interrupt channels and long casts and to counter stomps. Life Transfer actually hits pretty hard in this build, and if you hit enough people with it, you can actually gain a substantial amount of life force. It's also great for dropping clones and phantasms. Tainted Shackles applies Torment, which does not really do a whole lot of damage in this build, but it also finishes with a group Immobilize on up to 5 targets. In Staff, your number 1 ability is Necrotic Grasp. It generates life force, but it also pierces, so look for opportunities to get big chunks of life force from enemies that are in a line, on turrets, clones, pets, and minions. When using marks, try and set them up under your enemy's feet rather than just throwing them out there. Mark of Blood is an exception to this. Its cooldown is so short that you can use it to mark an entrance to a point or just spam it around. At the very least, you can get an enemy to burn a dodge roll, and most likely with a 6-second cooldown, you're going to have access to it again anyway. Mark of Blood works as an AoE bleed, and it also grants regeneration. Chillblains is an AoE chill and poison. Putrid Mark allows you to take up to 3 conditions on yourself and move them on up to 5 enemies in the triggered area. Reaper's Mark is a group fear. Make sure you save this one for a clutch moment. When you don't have any life force and you are forced into a melee situation, a Necrotic Slash, Stab, and Bite can actually hit pretty hard and also generate life force. Life Siphon is a channeled spell that drains life from your enemy and gives it to you. Dark Pact is a single target immobilized that is a great way to set up a well. Wail of Doom causes confusion for 2 seconds on up to 5 targets. Locust Swarm grants you swiftness but also cripples enemies around you. And an interesting thing about this skill is the cripple effect will still hit your enemy and apply cripple even if you are blinded. Setting up your wells can be done with Dark Pact, Chillblains, and Locust Swarm. These can really help you keep your enemy in those wells for a long time. Once you have a well on the ground, if you enter into Death Shroud, it's going to guarantee each pulse of the well scores a crit through the trait Death Perception. And here are just a few more examples of how you can use certain skills to keep enemies trapped inside of your wells. Lich Form is a 15-second duration, and entering Lich Form grants you stability, but that does not grant you immunity to blindness, and anyone that knows how to counter a Lich is going to either blind you or line of sight you, or both. So you have to think like a thief when using Lich Form. Be very, very sneaky, and make sure the attention of your enemy is someplace else before you pop it. At first it does seem like it's all about spamming number 1, which is Deathly Claws, and that certainly is part of it, but it is important to know what your other 4 Lich skills can do too. In the number 1 spot is Deathly Claws. This skill just really hurts. It's like Life Blast turned up a few notches. This skill alone is a game changer in a group fight if you can avoid being shut down while casting it. Try setting it up with your number 2 ability, Mark for Death, which causes 10 stacks of vulnerability on up to 5 targets, and you can deal even more damage. In the number 3 spot, Chilled Wind is a knockback and a chill that can affect up to 3 targets. This one can save your life. Number 4 is Mark of Horror. When the mark is triggered, it summons 5 Jagged Horrors to fight for you. These minions stay alive and persist even after your Lich form has expired. Number 5 is the biggest reversal of fortune skill in the game to this date, removing all conditions from yourself and 12 conditions from your allies while removing 9 boons from the enemy. With that, I will conclude this video on Power Necro basics and setup. I hope you found this information helpful, and as always, thanks for watching.
Your team is victorious!